Rod Lane, ADOT South Central District.
Jamie Brown with PAG.
Catherine Skinner, Pima County.
Pat, Sonia Kelly with Tag.
Sam Credio, City of Tucson. And then let me go to the folks that we have online. I will start with Davida.
Hi, Davida Mueller, Suntran.
Thank you, Davida. Heidi.
Heidi Lasham, Tana Morana.
Thank you, Heidi. Jason. Jason, are you there? Maybe he's muted. We have Jason Bahi on the online. Mark.
Mark Novak, University of Arizona.
Dan.
Dan Grossman, Town of Marana.
Thank you, Dan. Patricia.
Good morning, everyone. This is Patricia Pablo with the Tohono O'odham Nation.
Thank you, Patricia. Robin.
This is Robin Rain, City of Tucson.
Thank
I
you.
had some trouble earlier with the audio, so maybe that's what was happening with the other folks that weren't able to respond online.
All right, great. Thank you, Robin. And last but not least, Natalie.
There we go. Can you hear me?
We can hear you, Natalie.
Okay. I think I was not sure I would be able to speak. So I'm Natalie Shepp. I'm with the Pima County Department of Environmental Quality.
Great. Thank you so much, Natalie. Anyone else online that I didn't call on? All right, well, we will go ahead and move on to item 2, in-kind reporting, and looks like Jamie Brown will take this item.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Regional planning efforts are enhanced by reporting time donated by attendees, volunteers, and participants. PAG collects data on the time dedicated to meetings and activities to apply for use as matching funds for grants and federal dollars. If you're paid with federal dollars, please let us know now. So I'll pause. Anybody paid with federal dollars for their time spent at this meeting? And you could follow up with us later if that is the case as well. Time spent in preparation for this meeting will be estimated by PAG staff who are knowledgeable of the agenda and meeting materials. At the conclusion of this meeting, the session report will automatically calculate your time spent in this meeting. Time spent working on PAG RTA initiatives, programs, and special projects may also be eligible for consideration for matching funds. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Jamie. We'll now move on to item 3, approval of the February 21st, 2024 meeting summary. This is an action item. Has everyone had a chance to review? Are there any comments or questions? And if not, I would entertain a motion for approval.
Mr. Chair, I had one addition. When we were going over future agenda items, I believe one was missed from this report of them, and it would be the pavement updates, the pavement committee updates.
Thank you, Catherine. Any other additions or comments? Any from online? Would anyone like to entertain a motion with that one edit from Catherine?
Good approval.
All right, Jose moved to approve the item. Is there a second?
Second.
Second. Any discussion? All right, hearing none, I'll call the vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? I will abstain because I was not present for the meeting. All right, motion passes. We will now move on to item 4, fiscal year 2025 to fiscal year 2029 TIP development process update and review of the draft TIP project list. I'll turn it over to Jamie Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and members of the committee. Hopefully you can hear me okay. As we get into this topic, this is about the TIP and about programming. And I think this is a good time to mention a big change for PAG. Very sad to say that Caroline Lowry will be departing PAG and has accepted a position at another organization to further her career. She will be greatly missed. Big shoes to fill. And so we're very happy for you, Carolyn. And so I will be the point of contact for the time being on tip-related items in terms of programming and things like that. Before I get into my slides, I'd like to pause and see if there's anything you wanted to say, Carolyn.
Let's see. I want to thank everybody. This has been a wonderful committee, and I will miss working with you. You all are shaping the future of our region, so please do your best. Keep us all safe and on, new roads. I'm excited about the future. I was recruited pretty heavily to go to another organization, and I'm excited. I'll be the director of grants and compliance for the Tucson Airport Authority. So it's a nice change. I will be missing downtown. Worked here in downtown for years, so this is my last week here. And thank you. Hope to keep in touch with all of you, some different boards and committees. And thank you, Jamie, for giving me the opportunity to chat.
Thank you, Carolyn. Well, in terms of getting back to the TIP development process and the project list, so I wanted to share some slides and then want to open it up for discussion. Problems advancing here. Okay, thank you. Next slide, please. So with the previous two TPC meetings, we've covered some of the principles guiding this process. So I won't cover those again today. I'm going to come back and revisit those at the next TPC meeting, but also too repetitive. Did want to just remind everybody about the anticipated schedule. We are working towards May 2024, May of this year, for Regional Council consideration for approval. We understand the importance of this TIP document for opening up new fiscal years for programming some major projects in our regions. We're doing our best to move it forward and appreciate all of your time and energy moving forward and all that you've done in the past, especially the TIP subcommittee. So you can see in the middle of this slide of bullets, we're sort of in the February, March timeframe, TPC review of full draft TIP project list. At our last TPC meeting, we had just, I think it was the day prior, we had just shared the draft list with, hadn't given you very much time to review it. We did ask for your review and comments, so I want to say thank you to all the member agencies that provided comments to us on the preliminary draft project list, and we made some updates which we'll discuss today. So we'd like to bring the draft list to the management committee and regional council this month. We also have the TIP open houses, the next slide coming up as well. We would like to have the TPC review the full draft TIP document in April and commence the 30-day public comment period shortly thereafter, followed by management and regional council meetings in May. So our goal is to also provide a preliminary draft of the full document before we ask for your approval in April of the final draft. So we're working feverishly on that. I'm looking at Adam, he's putting in some long hours coordinating all of that document assembly. So this is the current document that has many chapters and appendices. Next slide, please. So in terms of TPC review and draft project list, so again, we shared this out with you, the preliminary draft, and we received comments. We, as requested, we put them in a document which was part of the packet that shows the comments, the commenting jurisdiction, and PAG response. So hopefully you had a chance to review all those comments and those responses. So some of the highlights, I think it's significant. You see a lot of ADOT requests for changing the funding sources on ADOT projects. I don't know, Mark, if you wanted to speak to why that's happening. I think it's somewhat significant because we've used Arizona STDG and STDG for many years, and we're transitioning away from that.
Right, so. You hear me now? There we go. Okay. So historically in the TIP, the RAC allocation to the PEG region for ADOT future projects has always been referred to as ASTDG, but that's not an actual funding program. It's just a term that was used to identify that RAC allocation. But everybody knew what that was referring to. But ADOT programming is requested to change. So the PEG TIP actually lists the funding source the federal funding program, that makes up the RAC allocation to the PEG region. So in this case, typically the RAC allocation, which is the 13% of the federal funds that come to the state, and what is programmed in the PEG region on ADOT major projects. So the majority of the funding program that makes up the RAC allocation is the NHPP, which is the National Highway Performance Program. And then occasionally ADOT will resource National Freight Program funding for certain projects. So ADOT program is requested that it be changed from using ASTBG, which isn't an actual funding program, to the actual funding program that they resource for the allocation. So it matches up with what is it put into the STIP, the State Transportation Improvement Program. So it matches up for the PEG tip, and it's consistent with what is entered into the STIP. And it's clear that when ADOT goes for funding authorization to federal highways, everything matches up. So that's the purpose of that change.
And so I'll just cover a few of these other ones, and then I think there will be some discussion here. I already had some chats at that point in particular. So yeah, thank you. We did see that there were a few projects that I think it was the database coding issue were not included in the project list that were actually in TIP amendments. Projects were, so those were added. We did add TIP IDs with no funding as placeholders because it sounds like there's an anticipation that the projects might have some rollover of RTA. So we did put a footnote at the bottom of each page, just acknowledging that those projects with no funding, we see some rollover funding. That's we did address ADOT's recommendation to remove OWP TIP IDs and using the approved work program as the sole source document for identifying planning programs and associated budgets. And then CRP or carbon reduction program funding for PEG planning initiatives. Our response to that comment is that it's included in the OWP, and that the OWP is the basis of a contract between PEG and ADOT and includes federally approved activities for NPOs. Those particular activities are planning initiatives that are being conducted by PEG through PEG staff. And so at such time we have CRP projects that are programmed on jurisdiction projects. It seems like that's the appropriate time to include these. And then the next slide, please. So we'll definitely come back to this topic. We did want to mention TIP open houses. So we did send out a request for TPC and TIP subcommittee participation in these upcoming open houses. We shared this slide from last TPC meeting, which shows that on March 19th, 20th, and 21st, we have these public open houses. Staff are preparing slides that are being updated. We're going to have some internal run-throughs. And for those of you who are participating in those open houses, just please let us know as soon as possible. We often get questions that are not really about projects in the TIP. So it's very helpful to have some of our member agencies there who can address those. If you can't attend, we can just redirect to your agency. But if you can send somebody, that's always appreciated. So we asked for you to all let us know by last Monday. I've heard from one jurisdiction. So if you could please, this is a reminder to please let us know that you can participate, and we'll be following up with more information. Next slide, please. And with that, I want to pause and turn it back over to you, Mr. Chair, for any discussion about the project.
Great. Thank you, Jamie. On that last slide, I do have a question that came to mind. Are you going to have staff available to answer any questions in Spanish?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. We will. Okay. In fact, Sonia is one of two people who will be doing that.
Great. Thank you very much. I need to know that. I guess probably most of the discussion will be on the previous slide where you had some summarizing some of the comments. So then I will now open it up to questions and comments from the committee.
I have a few questions.
Go ahead.
First, back to what we were saying about the change in funding source for the ADOT. And you probably said this, I just missed it. Instead of it being ASTBG, it will be showing up as ST match now.
I didn't mention that. So, as part of the RAC allocation. The RAC allocation that comes to the PAG region for those ADOT major projects, that includes the federal dollar and the state match. So we have to now split that out.
Okay. So that would be the change to all these ST matches everywhere. My second item is the decision to remove the OWP funding. I know I had brought up a question at the last meeting saying there's confusion and misalignment between what we report in the TIP document and what is in the overall work program. And please help straighten those out so that we can explain and tell the story of where the funding that comes to this region is going. And I saw the comments and the responses, and it looks like it was at ADOT's recommendation to just remove the overall work program. I will say the question is still outstanding. Where is that money really going? Because the contract between ADOT and PAG is not one that we see to verify that the funding is going in those places. And secondly, I'm really concerned that this is a big change in practice for the PAG tip without regional council, management committee, or this body having a conversation about, is this the appropriate direction? I went back in my office and looked at the earliest tip I had on my shelf. It was the 2002, 2006 tip. At that time, the overall work program was being shown in there. So we have over 2 decades of reporting in one manner. And now, as a response to a comment without any discussion, it's just being removed. And it's a huge percentage of the federal money that comes to PAG for programming. It's not an insignificant amount. And so that really is concerning to me. And I would love to hear from the rest of the committee about how they, I have conversations with my leadership in my organization, and I'm going to have trouble explaining this one. So I don't know if anybody else has reacted to that.
You want to respond?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Ms. Skinner, and members of the committee. I think I would like to see if ADOT could maybe elaborate as well, because although it does seem, I do want to acknowledge that this is a change. These tip IDs have been in place for, as you can see by the suffix of 00 or 01 or 2, they've been in place for over 2 decades of some basis. So it's a long-standing practice. That said, I've been hearing for quite some time that we are sort of an outlier as far as MPOs go. Please correct me if I'm wrong, Mark, that we show the funding in 2 areas, and it has, every time we bring forward either the TIP or the OWP, we get the comment about the mismatch between what you're showing in the TIP doesn't match what's in the OWP. So I think our response was, because of the recommendation should just included in the OWP, we would go forward and do that. And that this is a good opportunity to have that committee discussion about any concerns moving forward. So I just want to acknowledge the comments. Thank you very much, Ms. Skinner. But Mark, do you mind elaborating a little bit, please?
Well, the recommendation was based on, I thought, based on my understanding, was there was an issue with reconciling from the PEG tip to work program, and there is not a requirement to also include the programming for the work program in the tip as well. There's not a requirement for that, so the funds are approved through the work program and authorized through the work program, including the activities for those funds. So basically the recommendation was, well, if there is an issue for the regions and jurisdictions to reconcile it, then have the work program be the source document for the regional planning activities in the work program. And that's what you refer to see what the activities are, what funding is being authorized, and the timeline for those activities. So that was the basis of the recommendation on removing the items from the tip.
If I may just add to that, please. I did bring down a copy of the OWP. I don't know if we have it electronically to share on screen, unfortunately, but we can pass this around. But you can see we have 6 funding tables, and it includes, the first table does include how much of each of these federal sources would be programmed as part of the overall work program, which does, get approved by the regional council. So in terms of transparency, we do show the breakout of the fund sources by federal, state, and regional. 6 tables per fiscal year. 12 tables.
So, to Catherine's point then, I mean, at this point, this is an action item. And so if the committee felt that we did not want to accept that comment and continue to report the OWP items independently within the TIP, we could make that recommendation as part of our deliberation today.
It's the committee's pleasure, Mr. Chair. I would just say that unless otherwise directed, we need to proceed with the process. However it unfolds, I don't think that we, for example, should cancel open houses. I'm not saying anybody suggesting that, but I think we need to proceed with the public process, continue to move forward as we resolve these issues.
Thank you for that. Yeah, I have limited time on this committee, so take that for what it's worth. The conversations that we've been able to have as a committee regarding the elements of the OWP have been extremely limited. In fact, I think we were told we can't talk about it. And so the only conversations that have been able to have about programming funds within the OWP occurred at the regional council. And I know that my representative on that board is very concerned about how we are reporting the carbon reduction program funding and what we're using those funds for. And so by showing that all wrapped up in one item in the OWP, I think is going to have some pause for concern, at least from my representative on the board. So I do want to make that comment publicly. Are there any other comments on this specific item before we move on to other comments? Paul?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I think it'd be wise to verify that you are indeed in compliance with federal regulations. Looking at the CRP requirements, there does appear to be a requirement to list explicit carbon reduction program projects in the STIP and TIP. So this appears to be circumventing that requirement. If there's a consolidation needed, that might be a good compromise. And the cleanup of the reconciliation of these legacy TIP projects that attempt to identify the activities in the OWP, it's obvious that that needs to be cleaned up. There's no doubt about that. But perhaps in this iteration, a consolidation of a single line item TIP project that just points to the PAG overall work program, shows all of the federal funding and all of the carbon reduction program funding that is indeed in the work program might be a solution in the interim. I would prefer it to be more detailed, and you may ultimately need to be more detailed to show that you're spending $1 million on household travel survey and spending $600,000 of carbon reduction program on an active transportation plan, and the explicit projects that are indeed federal aid projects appear to be required to be listed in the TIP. So how you accomplish that, I think, is a big concern, and I'd be wary of just not including it there until it's verified that that is an allowable thing, because it appears at a minimum the carbon reduction program funding and the projects that that funding is going on to are required to be listed in STIPs and TIPs. So I think we should make sure that we're in compliance with federal regulations, and if until we work out the details, perhaps a consolidated single line item project that points to the funding in the work program and references the TIP viewer to look at the work program to get the details of how is the 30 to 35% of the region's STBG and 100% of the carbon reduction program funding being spent within the work program.
One other funding source that would previously be shown in the OWP is the ADEQ funding. And I'm just curious, is that a requirement to be shown in the TIP or not? Do you know, Mark?
It's local funding, so I would say the requirement is all Title 23 money. We've included in The tip, whether it's infrastructure or if it's on the planning side, goes to the work program. PDQ funding, I don't believe it's a requirement for them.
And if I may, to continue with one of my concerns with eliminating this from the program or from the tip is one of the responsibilities of the tip subcommittee and then kind of by us acting on their behalf is fiscal constraint of the tip. Now there's a big gap in there. And so it's difficult to say we're using all the region's funding in any given year because we don't have any demonstration of that. And I don't know, that was one of the questions I brought up last time as well, is I'd love to see that demonstration of fiscal constraint that's required for the first 4 years of the tip for all funding sources as part of our ability as a committee to know whether we should take action on this item. So I'm hoping that's prepared and is an upcoming slide, but otherwise that's my other concern. So I guess Jamie. Directed towards that.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair, Ms. Skinner. So in terms of fiscal constraint, we are preparing the Appendix 2 table for the full draft tip document, which includes a series of tables. It turns out, I think we've been showing historical information that's actually not required, but we may continue to list some of that, but we will have that required table of fiscal constraint. So for this, the TIP subcommittee, the December worksheet that you all endorsed as a good place for a milestone for the next steps, it included showing how much programming for HERF 12.6 was the total versus how much in terms of a cash flow was available each fiscal year. So I think we were trying to demonstrate through that worksheet for HERF 12.6, STPG, and HERF 2.6 fiscal constraint in that worksheet. And we'll have a fuller analysis in the document when it's ready. It's a couple weeks.
So that PAG, the RTA worksheet was a snapshot of part of the projects in the TIP. So that did not demonstrate fiscal constraint. It demonstrated it for that exercise we were doing, but it did not include the OWP stuff, for instance, to show that $4.1 million of STBG is going to PAG. And if you could remind me, what is the STBG federal obligation authority for 25 that we're aiming for?
So in terms of so what we were programming in that worksheet was the greater than 200,000 population bid. As you might all recall, we're now required to pay attention to the allocation of those funds by population. It was something that really was something that PAG really had to pay attention to. So going forward, we're going to be talking about SDBG greater than 200,000, for example. And that's where all the RTA road wheelment projects are in our region or in that urban area that's within that population band. And so that amount that we used for fiscal constraint in that worksheet was tied to that population band of about 15 million, 300, I don't have it in front of me, about 15,3 or 5.
And what is it for the full region? That's my question. All population bands.
I don't think I have that in front of me, the total. So we'd have to follow up on the total, but in fact, the draft that we're providing of this Appendix 2 will show the total. And I've talked to Mr. Hoffman about it as well, in terms of what we need to show for fiscal constraint. We're not going to just show the greater than 200,000, we're going to show the total. I just don't have that in front of me. It's actually, I just shared the draft this morning in terms of.
Okay, well, so just to follow up on that, if I may, Chair. In 2023, fiscal 2023, the federal obligation authority was 26.6 million. For 2024, what we've been working on is 21.5 million. And if I just look at the STP that has been programmed in the TIP project list that was provided today, and then adding in what I believe the OWP to be, we're leaving $1.6 million on the table as a region. So do we have a plan for that $1.6 million? When are we going to come up with that plan?
Yeah, great question. We can follow up with more information. It's actually pretty complicated because, as some of you or all of you may know, we released a call for projects for what we said was regional transportation alternatives grants across 3 different population regions. Well, actually, it was an assemblage of not just transportation alternatives funds, but also STBG in the lower population units, so that we can make sure that our region is programming all of our federal dollars. We're not losing any federal dollars to the region, but also maintaining the directive to program those on RTA commitments. Those are all RTA 41 eligible projects. So we work closely, we monitor the federal ledger to make sure that we're staying on top of it, and we can provide more information at a future meeting.
I will just say, I have big concerns with leaving $1.6 million on the table. And Pima County has lots of land area that falls in those lower population bands, because we cover the full county. And so we're always pressed to find funding for projects. And to me, this sounds like there's $1.6 million somewhere that we should be talking about. And it is difficult to get a federal project construction ready. So if this is money for next year and we have 3 months to get it authorized, it really limits our ability to get something out the door. And I think that is, I know we're not on that item, but it should be a topic on the next meeting to get a real analysis of where our funding is, because it is not transparent to me or clear to me where this money is.
So just to round that out, it sounds like the determination of some of that lower band funding for RTAG types of projects will likely not be reconciled by the time the TIP is ready to go and published, or at least not by the end of the meeting for us to make a decision on. So how do we, I don't know the best method by which to still identify that in the project listing, whether it's a, projects to be determined through competitive regional transportation alternatives program. And then we show the listing of available funding. And then as that is programmed onto RTAG projects, it moves forward with a TIP amendment for the explicit projects from City of Tucson or Pima County or whatever projects are funded. So I don't know if that's a solution necessarily to that dilemma of not showing that $1.6 million anywhere in the project listing. It's out there. We know, we've seen the memo. We know the RTAG process is looking to use the RTAG funds and the lower band SCBG, but it hasn't yet been programmed. And I'm not sure if it's going to be programmed by the time the TIP is published.
So maybe to follow up on that, Jamie, let's sort of recap what is our task today. I understood by the material that you're asking for approval of the project list that was included in the material. It'd be helpful if you could just walk us through some of the next steps. I know you talked about the open houses. Some of my specific questions: when can we expect to see the full picture that some of the questions that have been asked are answered? And then when do we expect it'll be moved up through the other committees?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I think it's helpful to determine where we are and what the next steps are. So we have put this project list on the agenda for next week's management committee. We also have a TPC meeting in a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
We are also pulling together all the components of the draft, and project list is part of that. So maybe I can just work backwards a little bit. So we have an April meeting. I think it's the third week, April 17th. That is when we would like to request TPC approval of the final draft for the 30-day public comment period. At that point, there should be agreement on the project list and all the content. So working backwards from that, we're assembling a preliminary draft to share with TPC for those comments so that we can then provide a final draft at that meeting. I think we're going to bring for the open houses to the public. There's not an expectation that it's final, right? I mean, it's a project list, it's in process. So if there are, adjustments that come out of comments from the public, that's also the point, right? So I think we can view that. We can view
There's, you would have a format, right? But they tell you on that table and the inside.
Vita, mute yourself.
The power strip is.
You can hear you. Thanks. Sorry, Jamie, go ahead.
So, yeah, I guess I wasn't, thinking what would happen if there's no action today, other than as I mentioned, we need to just proceed. We can bring this forward to the next TPC meeting. Because, I don't know if I need to, I think, talk internally to see if we need to have another special meeting. But I think we want to march forward with, the draft list, taking to committees for review and or action, and also proceed with the tip open houses. And again, we really need to make sure that by April 17th, there's agreement on the project. So we have time to make adjustments. And if
Can you go to
adjustment
the-
comes out of today, then we can.
Can you go to the next slide just to show those open house dates? Just as you're talking. So those are all kind of occurring that same week as our next TPC meeting. What's the recommendation you're bringing to management committee next week?
Our schedule was to request action.
Based on our action today.
Correct.
Got it. That's helpful. Thank you, Jamie. And then ultimately what you're shooting for is a May approval by the regional council?
Correct.
Okay. You have that date just offhand?
I think it's May 30th. I believe it was pushed back a week. Normally it'd be the week prior. Does anybody confirm that? Adam and I have been looking at it closely. I'm pretty sure it's May 30th.
Okay, that's fine. That helps me just see kind of what we've got laid out. So there's a lot of work to be done in the next couple months. And I know that collectively this committee wants to see this, wants to see us meet this timeline. So I certainly don't think any of us are trying to hold it up. Before I kind of start to close out this item, are there any other comments from the folks online or anybody else in the room that we haven't already talked about, that weren't addressed explicitly by the comment response sheet? Hearing none, then let's talk about some of the comments that have been made. So, I'm definitely hearing some level of discomfort with the way the draft project list is proposed today. I think we got some answers to the questions, but not all of them. So what I'd like to hear from the committee is what your thoughts are on how to move forward. Would you like to see those answers? Would you like to see some answers to those questions and maybe a revised draft project list by our March 20th meeting? Which I would then ask that the management committee not take action next week, if that's the case. But I want to hear from the committee first before I call for a motion. Thoughts or go ahead, Catherine.
I mean, I'm really torn by the overall work program portions of it, and I fully understand what you're saying, Mark. It has to be one place or the other. I'm concerned changing something that's been such a long-standing practice without management committee, which is a policy committee, weighing in on it. And so I would hope that they could let us know if that's the direction they'd like to see before we look at numbers and finalize the project list. So, it's kind of a hybrid of what you're saying.
Sure.
I don't think it's necessarily ready to approve by us today or by them at their meeting, but we do need feedback from them if this is a change in direction.
Is that, could we ask for that feedback by way of a motion? I guess that's a question for staff.
I think if that's the pleasure of the committee, Mr. Chair, I think that seems reasonable to me. Seems like you're asking for some direction. It's a major change. So, without consulting internally, I can't really say yes or no, but it seems like that's really up to you and this body to determine. So, but I think that's to me sounds better than this committee just deciding to come up with a new recommendation, because I think it is a policy decision, and maybe that would be helpful to get clarity going forward.
Because I think that by and large, there's, I look at the comments, there's not a ton of issues with the project list, which is, I understood, was our action today to approve the project list. But there's definitely some key issues that I'm hearing we're uncomfortable with just approving the list in its current form. Given we're actually in a good place, given that there's management committee next week, to immediately have another TPC meeting, that we can ask the management committee to review this matter and give us their feedback on making this change midstream. And so I don't know how you'd formulate that motion, Catherine, but I think that that would be appropriate given the conversation.
Excuse me, Sam.
Yep, go ahead.
We had a couple, this is Heidi. We have a couple folks here that had their hands up. But
Okay.
I know for the town of Marana, after comments were due, it just came in that we were talking with our discussions with Union Pacific Railroad on the Tangerine 2A project. And it looks like they're gonna request that we actually put in a third track and move switches around. So the cost of that project is going to be going up. So Fausto is actually going to be putting in a formal request of an amendment. But since it's past the comment period, I just wanted to bring that up now as we're talking about these discussions.
Great, thank you, Heidi. So my apologies for not seeing your hand up. Jamie, was there any response to that, or you'll just include that as a comment?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Lasham, generally speaking, I think we're going to probably have to wait to make any adjustments until after this TIP is approved.
Okay.
We've been trying to say that, it's a snapshot in time. Our real deadline is actually in October at that TIP subcommittee meeting where everybody provided their updated cost estimates. We've made some minor adjustments since then, but if we keep making changes, we won't be able to give you the fiscal constraint and all that. So I think, thank you. I think if you can provide more detail, Ms. Lasham, on what that request would look like in the fiscal years, we'll work with you to make those changes. It just might not happen between now and May, but we can amend the TIP. And I'm just looking at Rick to see if he's got any comments.
Got it.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for that clarification, Jamie. Heidi, does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. I'll work with you, Jamie, on that when the time is right.
Great, thank you.
Great, thank you so much. And then I see Josue from City of South Tucson has his hand up. Josue?
Hey, good morning, everybody. Hope everybody's doing well. Just want to confirm here real quick. So I'm looking at the list, and just so I understand, still kind of getting my understanding how this processes work. What does that, like the 25 to 29, what does that really mean for the South Tucson projects? I know we've got a total of like 3 or 4 here. One of them is transit services. What does that mean in years 27, 28, and 29 when there's no dollars identified there for those years?
If there are members of the committee, that's actually a big part of the discussion around RTA next. So our understanding, and I do want to look to the team for help with this, but for the roadway element projects, my understanding is there's a commitment to complete those projects using other regional sources after the cessation of the RTA excise tax collection in 2026. With operations funds for transit, there's no money after 2026. So I know the RTA next discussion, that's a really important part of it in terms of continuation of transit funding. Any others want to speak to that?
No, that's accurate.
Yeah. Okay. So just so I'm 100% clear, and I could bring something over to our council to understand this. After this TIP process, we're hopeful that the RTA next proceeds. Otherwise, we are not, or we cannot fund transit services for South Tucson. Just so I'm 100% clear through this TIP process.
Yeah, I think just to maybe state what Jamie said a little bit differently, Josue, is that the funding for RTA is only through 2026. So,
okay.
And that's, assuming that plan ends, there would be no RTA funding available for transit service in the city of South Tucson or the city of Tucson or any of the other outlying areas.
Okay, got it. Okay, sounds good. Same thing, I guess, goes for the other 2 projects there, the intersection improvement projects.
That's why, if I may, this is Carolyn Laurie. Thanks for asking that question. So when you have money that's pre-programmed in the TIP, that the funding will continue to roll forward until the project is completed or there's a change in the IGA that's somehow driven through a decision made by regional council or the RTA board. So if you're seeing projects that perhaps don't have funding right now, but you have an empty box and your project is shown in the TIP, we suspect that you will have those funds available to you in the future.
Okay, Sounds good. Thank you.
You're welcome. And of course, please work with Lance. He's your contact and he can help you through that. Thank you.
Thank you, Carolyn. Anything else, Josue?
No, that's all. Thank you.
Yep, thank you. And then I also see that Natalie has her hand up. Natalie?
Hi, so based on what Catherine and Paul were saying, especially about the carbon reduction program and the fact that the CRP guidance specifically does state that projects must be identified in the statewide plan or the transportation improvement program plan. I will not be able to vote to approve this list without the inclusion of those projects. As well as the fact that we have not been allowed to talk about how Justice 40 fits into our decision-making. We haven't even been able to discuss it as an agenda item at these meetings after repeated requests. So I won't be able to vote yes on the approval of this list.
Thank you, Natalie, for those comments. Did anyone else have their hand up online that I did not get a chance to call on? All right, hearing none. So here we are. This is an action item. I know that we want to keep this process moving.
Yeah.
Yep. Oh, I'm sorry. That's right, Carolyn. You had a comment.
Yeah, thank
My
you.
apologies.
So I just wanted to, since it's my last time at this meeting, I wanted to just ask a couple of questions about this listing. If you were separate from the OWP items, do you feel like the list is ready to move forward?
I believe it's ready to move forward. The only other thing I would mention is if there is outstanding money that we haven't programmed, I would like that clearly identified so we know what we should be working on to get in there, even if it is through a tip amendment later.
Okay. And then my next question is to Mark and Jamie. What year are we in the LWP right now? Is it year 1 or year 2?
Year 1.
Year 1. So there'll be an opportunity to review the OWP again in the future, in the near future?
Yeah, thank you, Ms. Laurie, members of the committee. So we're on a biennial update cycle. And so we will be moving the process forward after this fiscal year ends. We'll commence our process. And in the spring of 2025, we will be bringing the draft OWP with the funding as shown.
So you will commence that process as soon as the new tip is approved, essentially, more or less within the first quarter, somewhere in there?
More or less, a lot of internal activity.
Of course, of course. So I'm wondering if we could suggest maybe moving the list forward with the understanding that the OWP items would be addressed. Or you could include them back in for this point and then have management provide the guidance on how to proceed. That way the heavy lift is done with the list is what I'm hearing, and your big concern is that change. And I do think that maybe ADOT and Mr. Ben were trying to respond to a request to look into those funds for you, Ms. Skinner, but perhaps we moved too quickly on those modifications.
So what I'm hearing, Carolyn, thank you for those comments, is that we approved the project list with the exception of the OWP item and asked for management committee to weigh in on that policy change of lumping everything in one item, bring that back to TPC in 2 weeks for further discussion and possible action at that point on that particular project.
It could be considered and maybe a means to keep the tip process moving forward. You have a list that's, everyone feels pretty comfortable with, and it's just a means to just address the OWP items.
And I would just further expand that to address what Natalie had just mentioned, is that kind of wrapped up in that is that carbon reduction program funding, how that's shown in the tip. And also Paul's comments about the federal regulations required around reporting those funds. And so, there seems to be a host of questions related to the OWP item that we need some clarity on, in addition to this policy decision to change course on how we show that in the project list. That's my understanding. Is everyone else on the same page as me? there. Am I missing anything, Jose?
Mr. Chair, again, I apologize, I had to step up.
You good?
Mark was talking about the reason why we're eliminating or recommending eliminating the individual over, well, I mean, WP numbers, tip ID number. What was the purpose for that?
My recommendation was based on, my understanding of comments made about the difficulty to reconcile between the tip and what's approved in the work program by federal highways. So there is not a requirement, to my knowledge. I'll bring up about the CRP funding, but the same applies for the STBG funding. You know, that funding requires to be in the tip. It's just a split of you know, your infrastructure type projects that are going in the tip versus what is going into the planning work program that PEG completes. So the recommendation was to resolve that maybe the confusion and not being able to reconcile between the tip and the work program is just have the work program be the sole source document for those funds that are approved by the federal agency. So and that work that is being completed by PEG. So that was the basis of my recommendation, was just remove them from the tip and include those activities only and that funding only in the work program. And that's where they are identified. The work is broken out by funding program and it's approved by federal highways. So that was the basis of my recommendation.
It does not need to be shown on the tip.
It does not. It has to be in one or the other. That's where it needs to be. Typically, if it's a planning activity that PEG is completing through the work program, then that's where it needs to be included, identified, and approved through the work program development process and eventually approved by federal highways. Or in most cases, if it's an infrastructure project, federally funded, then it needs to be identified in the tip. Because that's the split. In PEG's work program, those are solely planning activities. And doesn't mean you can't show it also in the tip. There's no restriction from doing that. But again, it was a response to the comment and having difficulty in reconciling the two and recommending that, hey, well then just show it in the work program. That's where the funding is broke out. That's where the activities are identified by funding source.
So essentially, it's a planning activity, so it doesn't have to be in the tip.
Exactly.
For infrastructure.
Right. Right. Because the federal funding is then authorized and the activity is authorized through the work program.
Okay. You're pointing to other MPOs in the state that don't put it in their tip. Can you decipher who does and who doesn't? Because I'm looking at the MAG tip and it appears that they show 6.9 million of STBG in their tip for the UPWP.
They may. Just some others that have decided to not do that. To just either it's in the work program or it's in the tip. Again, it's a regional decision on how to do that.
But that would be the STIP, no, for those other MPOs? The majority of those MPOs don't have their own standalone tips. They have.
Oh, no, they do.
Okay.
Yeah, every MPO, every COG has their own tip that feeds up into the STIP. Yep.
So, I mean, I liked the way, Sam, you kind of mapped out. We're fortunate that there's a timeline that I think affords us the opportunity to get the direction we need from management committee. So, excuse me, I would move that we hold off on making any approvals of the proposed project list this week until we receive direction from management committee as to whether the overall work program elements projects should be included in the tip.
All right, there's a motion on the table. Is there a second?
I second.
Who was that?
Natalie.
Thank you, Natalie. Natalie, your hand is still up. Did you have a
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify, just reading from the federal guidance document for the carbon reduction program, I can read it to you under the section G, eligibilities and coordination requirements. It specifically states projects must be identified in a statewide transportation improvement program, and be consistent with the long-range statewide transportation plan and the metropolitan transportation plan. It specifically states it. So I just don't think the information we're being provided is accurate.
Thank you, Natalie. We are in the discussion period. Any other discussion before I call the question? Jose?
But she just meant project. This is a planning, so that's what we're discussing.
Right.
Yeah, project, absolutely. I've been doing this for a while. It's got to be the tip. Makes it into the step. But from what I hear from Mark, it's not really a project. It's more like a planning activity.
Right.
Which just doesn't really need to be in the tip.
Right. And yeah, and that's the same, what she read off. It's the same for all the federally funded program, STBG, that it's going to say that it needs to be included in the tip, that it's a project. But if it's a planning activity that PEG is conducting as part of their work program, it has to be included in there. That's how the funding is authorized for that project. So it's to say that you can't. It's not going to say that, but the option is there to, if it's an activity that PEG is completing as part of their work program, it can be solely listed there and the funding authorized based on the approved work program.
So just to kind of chase this out a little bit, in the example of a PAG activity that is doing van pool work using carbon reduction program as part of their work program, that would not be required to be in the tip. But if those van pool activities were being done by a Pima County or a city of Tucson, they would be required to be in the tip.
Exactly. That's correct.
That seems to be a disconnect that is lacking transparency to the public, who doesn't really care who's administering that project. They just want to see where their tax dollars and the funding that comes to the region is being spent. So for us to remove it from the complete list, that I know it goes back even earlier than the 2002, 2006 tip, where PAG has featured the regional funding that is being used in the work program for a variety of activities. I think that's removing transparency, and we should be very cautious with doing that, regardless of who is executing the project plan, whatever the activity is using the federal funds. I think we should be upfront about it. So,
Any other discussion on this item before I call the question? Anybody online? All right, seeing no hands, I'm going to go ahead and call the question. All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? All right, motion passes unanimously. And Mr. Brown, I will make myself available to attend management committee if you'd like me to come and attend and convey the sentiment of the committee to help with this discussion. I'd be happy to do so.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll follow up with you.
All right, great. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I think it's, important as you do that. I think the point that Carolyn clarified for us is probably a very important message, that the vast majority of the project listing is looking pretty good. There's just a few things that need to be reconciled. Right? Those for secret guidance.
Right.
Yeah, and thank you, Paul, for bringing that up. I think that's also a message we want to convey at the open houses. If this is still undecided, unresolved, just let the public know that we're working through the committee process, but most of the list is as approved.
Thank you. All right, we will move on to item 5, which is fiscal year 2022 to fiscal year 2026 PAG Transportation Improvement Program Amendment number 2022.100. Adam Ledford. Adam.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, good morning, everyone. Updated formula funding for FTA grants 5307, 5339, and 5337 were announced at the beginning of 2023, which may be applied to fiscal year 24 transit projects using the same priorities and guidelines in place for the development of the fiscal year 25 through 29 TIP budget list for the city of Morgantown. Jurisdictions submitted requests to a call for amendments issued in early January 2024, and a live programming exercise was conducted during the subsequent transit working group meeting to achieve consensus and adhere to the required fiscal constraint for the programming year. Changes to the FTBG flexible funding amounts earmarked for transit were managed the same way. This formal amendment consists of programming changes for 13 TIP IDs pertaining to regional transit service in fiscal year 24 in the current TIP. It was recommended for approval by the Transit Working Group last month with unanimous vote. Today, we're here to answer any questions from the committee and to ask for a recommendation for approval.
Great. Thank you, Adam. Any comments or questions from the committee on this item? Anyone online? All right, hearing none, I would entertain a motion to approve the amendment as presented by Mr. Ledford. There a motion?
So moved.
Item moved by Catherine. Any seconds? Second by Jose. Any discussion on this item? All right, hearing none, let's call for the question. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Thank you, Adam. I noticed we didn't have a future item, future agenda items on this agenda. So we will talk about future agenda items at the next meeting in 2 weeks. I would say that if, I apologize, I wasn't here last time. If you have any outstanding agenda items that haven't been agendized, please send to me. I'll be meeting with PAC staff in the near future to start planning out our future agendas so we can make sure we capture those items. I know the list is growing kind of large. So please send those to myself and Jose. And feel free to copy, I guess it's Jamie and Jeanette, although Jeanette's out sick today. I don't need that other item, right? All right, well, before we adjourn, I will just take a little chair's privilege to say congratulations to Caroline on your new opportunity, and we all wish you well. And with that, we stand adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.